Good afternoon. I guess it's morning for those of you in the West. My name is Ken Brown. I'm with Transportation Energy Partners, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, focused on collaborative strategies for securing funding for clean transportation projects. In terms of housekeeping, I just want to let people know if you have a question, type your question in the question box on the right side of your screen, and we will attempt to answer all the questions. Just to begin, for those of you who don't know Transportation Energy Partners, we provide policy support to Clean Cities coalitions and our 15,000 stakeholders across the country. We work to make sure that coalitions and stakeholders are informed of key policies, programs, and funding opportunities, and we educate public policy and decision makers about the importance of advancing markets for cleaner vehicles and fuels. Today you're going to hear from Lori Clark with Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities, and also Colleen Crowninshield with Tucson Clean Cities. I want to thank our sponsor, which is EarthX. For those of you who don't know, EarthX organizes and manages the world's largest environmental expo and experience. It will take place beginning on April 19th with their Environmental Film Festival. This all takes place in Dallas, Texas. Starting April 25th, there will be a series of conferences and workshops on the 25th and 26th. And then there will be an environmental expo, which starts on the 26th, Friday the 26th, and runs through Friday the 28th. If you live in and around the area, you should be there. If you don't live nearby, you should travel there. It's going to be a fantastic event with all kinds of environmental experiences to learn from and to participate in. And for more information, you can go to www.earthx.org. Transportation Energy Partners, in partnership with Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities, EarthX, and the NAFA Fleet Managers Association in the Texas area, will be sponsoring a workshop which will take place on Friday morning, April 26th. It's called Sirens, Schools, and Shippers, Solutions for Fleets that Serve Our Communities. And again, we want to encourage everybody to register for that workshop. You can go to www.earthx.org to register for the workshop. In terms of the workshop agenda, here's a brief overview. We will have breakout sessions, one focused on school buses, another focused on emergency response vehicles and delivery vehicles. We will have a session focused on decision-making tools for fleet managers, and then a session focused on funding sources and how to access funding for clean vehicles, fuels, and infrastructure. We will have a lunch session with a special guest speaker in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. And then in the afternoon, there will be an opportunity to view the vehicles and products and talk to the various vendors. Some of the speakers include Department of Energy, Natural Renewable Energy Lab, US EPA, Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, PepsiCo, Stealth Power, the Polk County, Florida Sheriff's Department, and CETA Energy, and many more. So it's going to be a great workshop. So again, I encourage people to register for Friday morning, April 26th in Dallas, Texas. Now we're going to talk, I'm going to talk briefly about some funding sources. First, there is just released a funding opportunity with the Department of Energy's Clean Cities program. Concept papers are due on May 1st, and full applications are due June 19th. You're going to hear more from Lori about strategies to secure funding from the EPA Diesel Emission Reduction Grants Program. This year's funding recently closed the cycle, and then the process will be open again in December for 2020 grants. And there are also opportunities through the Department of Transportation's Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. And you should work with your local metropolitan planning organization and your state Department of Transportation to talk with them about clean vehicle and infrastructure projects that could be funded with CMAQ funds. In terms of the Department of Energy Clean Cities grant funding opportunity that's just out, there are 5 topical areas of interest where they're soliciting grant proposals. One is focused on alternative fuels, vehicles, and infrastructure for resiliency and emergency preparedness. The second one is mobility services in rural America. The third, which I think is right up this audience's alley, which is they're looking for projects that will demonstrate alternative, the proof of concept of alternative fuels and vehicles with fleets. And this is going to be in areas where alternative fuels and vehicles have not penetrated the market yet. So this, for example, could be clean school buses in parts of the country where there are no alternative fuel school buses. It could be other kinds of fleets and vehicles in markets which have not been penetrated yet. So to be successful, you're going to need to show that these vehicles have not penetrated the market yet, and how your project will help demonstrate opportunities that will then be replicated and build markets in places where they don't exist. The fourth area is focused on data collection on electric vehicles, and the fifth area is an open topic. So if you have something that you want to propose, this is your opportunity to do that. Again, DOE for these projects strongly recommends partnerships with Clean Cities coalitions, and the due date for the concept paper again is May 1st. In terms of other opportunities, state funding can be a good source of funding for your projects, and you should reach out to your state energy offices, your state environmental offices, your state transportation offices, and your state governor offices. I want to add that virtually every state right now has developed or is finalizing a plan to spend the money that they've received through the Volkswagen settlement. And again, in order to access that funding, you need to find out which particular office, and it's typically going to be one is and what your opportunities are, but every state has tens of millions of dollars, if not more, that they'll be spending in the coming couple of years out of their Volkswagen settlement dollars. Another source, and Colleen, I'm going to let you talk briefly to this, is charitable foundation funding, and there are some opportunities here. Colleen, would you like to say a few words about foundation funding?
Certainly. There are quite a few states who have foundation funding opportunities. Typically, foundation funding is given for environmental projects. It's not typically alternative fuels. However, if you can prove the need for your community, it gives you a greater chance to be able to be successful with foundation funding. We have a few coalitions who have been successful with foundation grant opportunities and foundation funding opportunities. And I'm happy to help you if you feel that there are foundation opportunities in your state. I'm happy to help you identify those and try to help you put your project into what type of an environmental project for the community you could create to be able to apply for that funding. But keep in mind that foundation funding is very competitive. It is more difficult to be successful in getting that foundation funding, but if you can prove that need in your community, it can be a very great opportunity for you. Many times it is not, there are no match requirements, it's just proving the need in your community. So it's not impossible, and I think that each of you probably has some opportunity in your areas for foundation funding.
And I would add that some of these are national foundations and fund projects all over the country. Some are regional foundations,
yes,
that focus on the southeastern United States, for example, or some might focus on California, or some might focus on the Midwest or New England. And then there are some foundations that are community-based foundations, and they're very focused on local communities.
Local communities. I think it's important to note that California has a great foundation, the Carl Moyer funding opportunity. There's a lot of money in that area, and I know EPA works with a lot of entities to help build the need for Carl Moyer funding for alternative fuels. So that is a great opportunity in California.
Great, thanks, Colleen.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lori, who's going to focus in on collaborative strategies to secure funding from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Ken. Can you hear me okay? Let me just check that first.
Yep, you sound great.
Thanks. So before I dive in on the EPA funding, I do want to take a quick detour back to what Ken and Colleen were just talking about with regard to the Volkswagen settlement and some of the big state grant programs. And if you happen to be listening and you're in Texas, that EarthX workshop that Ken was talking about is going to be a great place to come and learn about the Volkswagen settlement funding, because in Texas, the agency that's responsible for administering that will be coming to give a presentation just on that topic. So, and that's coming from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So make sure you take advantage of that workshop to get the details there, the latest and greatest. And then also, Texas has a big grant program that's kind of a counterpart to California's Carl Moyer program. It's called the Texas Emissions Reduction Plan. And there's a lot of similarities between it and the Volkswagen funding and the EPA Clean Diesel funding. So if you are in Texas and you've never heard of TERP, please write down those letters, TERP, and you can feel free. My contact information will be in the slide deck, and you can contact me, and we can hook you up with all the details that you would need to know. So with that, let me dive into EPA funding. This is definitely not one of the only funding sources out there, but it's one of the ones that I think people have come to expect more than many of the others. It pretty much It's very reliably available every year, and it's restrictive in who can apply for it, which makes it a prime candidate to be the type of funding where you need to find partners to collaborate. So next slide. So here in the Council of Governments, we have the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities Coalition. So if you're not familiar with Clean Cities, it was created by the Department of Energy back in 1992 in response to the Energy Policy Act. And we seek to advance the nation's economic, environmental, and energy security. And it's all based on local practices and partnerships with local fleets, public and private. It's fuel technology neutral. We're not in the business of promoting electrification only or propane only or biofuels only. It's whatever works in that particular community and for that particular end user. So you can see our website there on the bottom, dfwcleancities.org, and it's on reducing fuel consumption, replacing fuel consumption, and eliminating fuel consumption, whether that's idle reduction technologies, replacing is like a fuel switching, and then conservation efforts is the reduce. So that's just a little bit of background, and there's a network of coalitions all over the country, and I'll show a map of that soon. Next slide. So here at Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities, we're housed in the Council of Governments, and we wear a lot of different hats. So we serve as a regional planning agency for the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. We also are the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Ken mentioned Get to Know Your MPO very early in the webinar. We serve that role here for DFW, and then we also are Clean Cities. So with all these different hats, there's definitely opportunity for us to go and seek grants left, right, up, and down. Next slide. So we have made a habit of going and seeking grant funding, and our approach with EPA in particular is to be a third-party administrator. And so what that means is we go and we apply to EPA to get with a proposal. If we're awarded, then we just turn around and we're a pass-through entity, and we distribute that money around the region. And so our goal is to make sure that the Dallas-Fort Worth area gets its fair share of the funds that are available nationwide. And so we then are simply a third-party administrator. So we are looking at our region's needs. Again, the goal is to secure those external resources, and then we subgrant those, and we try to ensure that there's an equitable distribution geographically across our area, but focusing largely on cost effectiveness, just as EPA does, to make sure we do the most amount of good with the least amount of money. And so when we are looking at projects, we focus largely on our non-attainment status. So by law, we're required to do air quality planning for ozone non-attainment as part of our role as a MPO. And so we're looking first and foremost at projects that reduce NOx emissions that help with our ozone non-attainment status. But we also are very cognizant of things that help reduce particulate matter, things that help reduce greenhouse gases. We're here in Texas. We don't talk a lot about climate change. We don't talk a lot about greenhouse gases. But that is something that we, as an agency, are very aware of and do a lot of work on. We just do it quietly. We also are looking to complement other efforts and so filling gaps. And so what we mean by that is there's a lot of funding available in Texas for school buses from other agencies. Maybe we don't really need a school bus proposal. Maybe we need something that pays for freight trucks or utility trucks instead. So you can see on the slide some pictures of the things that we funded over time. City of Denton was able to buy a hybrid bucket truck. One of our major fleets, Southeastern Freight Lines, hi to Chip if he happens to be on the webinar, and thank you for the photo, was able to buy beautiful new 18-wheelers along with the SmartWay technologies like that side fairing you see at the bottom of the trailer. That was purchased through one of the grants that we received from EPA. And then we have also done some idle reduction infrastructure projects. Next slide. So we have a pretty good track record since I've been here, or I guess since 2007, 2006, when DERA really became known as DERA. We've gotten 14 awards, and you can see the graph just kind of shows how we've spent money really on a lot of different types of things over time, just going back to what is the region's need at the moment. Next slide. So for those of you who can't apply for DERA, and in case you haven't really looked at EPA's DERA programs before, you want to go to epa.gov/clean-diesel. And DERA is actually, it's kind of the shorthand that everybody uses to refer to the programs because it's the name of the legislation, the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act. Technically, the name of the program that most people apply for is the National Clean Diesel Funding Assistance Program. But if you've not looked at it, not everybody is eligible to apply. If you're a private fleet, you can't apply directly to EPA. Eligible applicants are public sector or organizations that are responsible for transportation and air quality. And so if you are a private fleet or an organization that doesn't necessarily have a grant writer or don't have the administrative capacity to apply directly, you want to find somebody to team up with. You want to find a partner. And so before you do that, you need to make sure you've got your business in order so that you can go in and look for that partner with all of your homework done. And so the first thing you need to do is know your own fleet. And the data points that are here on this slide, the model year, the fuel type, gross vehicle weight, and mileage, are really the things that are most important that guide you through kind of the, is this project eligible for the grant funding, yes or no process. And so that table that is on the slide is actually a screenshot of something that we did for one of our local fleets here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They gave us a copy of their fleet inventory with those critical details. And then we went through, I think it doesn't show everything. I think there's about a dozen different grant programs that we went through, and we assessed for each one of the vehicles in their fleet, is it eligible or not eligible for that grant program? And then for certain programs, we could say, typically, we think you would be able to qualify for, say, $10,000 if you wanted to scrap this vehicle through this program. And so that's the type of technical assistance that you could look and see if your local Clean Cities Coalition could offer you, or maybe your local MPO if they happen to have a strong air quality staff. Next slide. And so the next thing that you want to make sure you're ready for in terms of partnership, you want to know your fleet, and then you want to have a plan. What do you want to do with your fleet? You know, are you just scraping by year to year and you're just replacing the one or two vehicles that is ready to go to be scrapped? Or do you have kind of a bigger picture, a longer term strategy for your fleet? Hopefully the answer is the second, that you have a big picture, long-term strategy. If you don't, you might want to start looking at that. And so you want to figure out what are the best strategies for you to invest in. And in order to do that, you really should start looking at long-term benefits. I know most fleets are looking at capital costs, and you look at how much it's going to cost to acquire that one new vehicle. But if you can look longer term at total cost of ownership or payback time, that's really going to give you more guidance on how to make investments in the right types of technologies, whether that means you're buying a hybrid truck or an electric truck or an electric bus or whatever the case may be. So this slide has a couple screenshots from a tool called A-Fleet, which stands for the Alternative Fuel Life Cycle Environmental and Economic Transportation Tool. It was developed by Argonne National Lab, and there's a really easy online version. If you go to that website and you go to that middle option, that A-Fleet online, it takes less than a minute to put in what state you're in, what your fuel cost is, and what type of vehicle you're looking at, and it'll show you what your simple payback is there on the top. There is an Excel version of the tool that is a lot more detailed, but it gives you a lot more control over some of the inputs, and you can really get a customized look at what would your fleet look like over time if you were to go all electric, or all propane, or all natural gas, or whatever the case may be. And just kind of play with some options and see what looks like it makes sense for you. So then you know what you want to do if you have an opportunity to get grant funding. Next slide. So then now that you've identified what you've got in your fleet, what you want to do, you need to go and find your friends. And your friends are the people who can go and apply for a grant on your behalf or with you as a partner if you were a fleet. And so, as I mentioned, we at the North Central Texas COG, we serve as a COG, as an MPO, and as a Clean Cities. And so those are the websites that you can go to find your local organizations. And then always remember also to look at what organizations have gotten DERA money in the past. You can go to that URL and see all of the previous national awards. And there are some coalitions and associations that have kind of formed over time that really applying for EPA's clean diesel money is one of the main things that they do. Some of them are kind of organized around a geographic area, like a Friends of a Port or something like that. Some are national, like the American Lung Association. Some of their chapters have applied. Those organizations that are not, you know, a state or local government agency that might have a footprint all over the country, or be willing to apply on behalf of fleets anywhere in the country and roll you into one of their applications. Next slide. And then one of the things that we really struggle with as an agency when we go out and apply for these grants is convincing our management that it's worth the risk to us. So what you're asking for, if you go and you team up with one of these other agencies and you ask them to apply on your behalf or to roll you into their project, you're asking them to take a risk on you, because whoever it is that applies for that grant with EPA, that receives that grant contract, it's that organization that's signing the contract and is on the hook to EPA for making sure all the requirements are met and that everything goes well. So from our perspective, if we're applying on behalf of another organization, we want to make sure that they know what they're getting themselves into and that they are not going to pull the rug out from under us. Like, you know, here's the project that I want to apply for, and then we're successful in getting the money, and then they change their mind. That's never good, and it makes it much harder for us to make the case the next time around to our management that this is something worth doing again. So you want to make sure you can showcase that your organization has the capacity and the commitment to follow the project through. So showing that you've got previous grant experience, showing that you've got well-documented internal policies and procedures, accounting practices, makes an organization like us feel much more comfortable that if we apply on behalf of somebody else, that somebody is going to be able to deliver on their part of the bargain. And then showing that commitment by putting air quality friendly practices into place. So maybe this is adopting an anti-idling policy for all of the fleet vehicles that your organization owns, or making a sustainability commitment or a carbon commitment, or, you know, pick any of those types of pledges that you would want to put into place, but putting that into the institution's goals so that there's something that can be pointed to hold people accountable in the case of staff turnover or something like that. We've all struggled with that, where there's a great project and there's this one person who's a champion, and then that person retires, and then things kind of struggle from there on out because those goals were not institutionalized. So showing that you've got institutionalized goals is very important. And then understanding the grant requirements. EPA money is federal money, and these four things, CFR 200, purchasing, property management, and reimbursement, are things that trip us up with people that we sub-award money to all the time. And so it's very important to be familiar with them. When it comes to purchasing, you have to make sure that you're purchasing through a federally compliant process. That means if you have a habit of ordering your vehicles from the same vendor year after year after year, that's not enough. You're going to have to either do an RFP or find a cooperative contract to purchase off of. It might mean having to change your typical habits. And so that's something that you want to make sure you're prepared for, or that your purchasing department is prepared for. Property management means you have to keep that asset in operation until there's no more federal agency interest. And then reimbursement process means that you can't finance the vehicle. You're going to have to pay for it outright and then get reimbursement after the fact through in compliance with typical federal grant fund rules. And so those are all things that can cause kind of the unexpected hiccups if you are successful in getting a grant. And so you just want to make sure that everybody goes into a process eyes wide open. And so those are some of the lessons learned that we've had over time. And then each one of those other sources, state funds, local funds, foundations, are going to have their own requirements. And you want to make sure that you understand what those are and the motivations. It's okay to ask why, basically. Next slide.
So I'm going to jump in for a minute, Lori. There was a note from one of our audience participants just to remind folks that nonprofit organizations and tribal governments are also eligible to apply for the EPA clean diesel grants. So just wanted to point that out.
Absolutely. And there's actually a separate grant solicitation just for tribal applicants that they get their own pot of money all by themselves.
Great. So I think that was your last slide, right?
Handing it back to you.
All right, thank you. Before we go into a summary of key tips for folks as you're building partnerships and preparing funding applications, I just wanted to see, Colleen, if you wanted to add anything to Lori's comments.
Well, on collaboration, I think I want to just make sure that people understand the importance of collaboration and how to successfully collaborate. You know, Tucson Clean Cities worked to apply for DERA funding for many, many years before we were successful. And the way we figured out how to make that connection was we asked for a debrief. And I think that's really important when you're applying for a grant anywhere. If you are not successful in winning that grant, ask for a debrief, where your strengths were and where your weaknesses were. You can learn from those weaknesses. We learned that because we're in attainment, we really didn't show enough of a benefit to the projects we were applying for. So we then reached out to a school district who was in non-attainment, asked them to collaborate with us to make this a three school district application, and we were successful. I think it's also really important to make sure that your grant partners understand what they are agreeing to do. I know that sounds really basic, but if you're going to apply for a grant and they don't understand the need to get you information when you must do your reporting process, that's critical. And if they don't know that they're going to be expending funds and when, that's critical. And if they don't understand their portion of the match to that grant, those are critical things that could make or break your grant opportunity this time and in the future. So I think it's really important to keep those things in mind. And if you are a private fleet and you are wanting to collaborate on a good DERA grant, then reach out to your Clean Cities Coalition, as Lori stated, and find out if there are school districts or municipalities or anybody else who is going to be applying for that funding, and show the benefit. You're going to have to show your benefit, but that shouldn't be too difficult. Work with your air quality agencies and look at what the air quality readings are in your area where your fleet is. You know, there are ways to do this, but you just have to be strategic, and collaborating on grant partners is the best way to be strategic.
Great, thanks, Colleen. And then just to kind of summarize on some key tips which we've talked about. One is to, whether it's EPA or Department of Energy or your state agencies or foundations, you need to understand the funding agencies and what their motivations and interests are and what they're looking for in terms of funding applications. When you're filling out grant applications, follow the grant instructions and answer all of the questions. Some people, you'd be amazed how they'll answer 5 of the 6 questions, but they'll leave one out for whatever reason. Number 3, I think it's important to write in plain English. Number 1, be clear. And number 2, tell the story of your project and your partnership, what makes it unique and what it will deliver in terms of results, whether that's air quality improvements, petroleum reduction, reduced maintenance costs, demonstration of an innovative technology that has the opportunity to be replicated. Whatever the program is, talk about how your project is unique and how it's going to deliver in terms of what the funding agency's program objectives are. Do not assume that the funder understands your community or your agency or your company or organization and your specific project. You need to explain that in a way that's understandable and doesn't use local jargon. As Colleen said, clearly define each partner's roles and responsibilities up front. Make sure that's clear in your partnership, and then make sure that's clearly explained in your grant application. You need to demonstrate that you can deliver. Use your past experience, capabilities, or whatever mechanisms you have to demonstrate that you can deliver. And then, as Colleen mentioned, if at first you don't succeed, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not interest from the funding agency. Many times I've had organizations that I work with or clients who didn't get a grant the first time around, maybe didn't even get it the second time around, and were successful on the third time. And as Colleen mentioned, it's very important if your grant is not successful to get a debrief from the funding agency, understand from them where your grant fell short, what your strengths were, what your weaknesses were, and then you have an opportunity to submit a stronger proposal the next time. Colleen, go ahead.
I think it's really important to make sure that everyone understands that it's really great to submit an application as a fleet, but when you collaborate and make it an application that will touch the lives of many different people, I think that makes a much stronger application. So what we say around here, because I think it was our 8th time applying that we finally were successful. Don't ever give up, but instead of celebrate, sing the song, collaborate. That I think collaboration is the key.
If anybody has questions from the audience, please submit them. This recording and the slides will be available on the Transportation Energy Partnership Partners website. If people want to take a look at it or spread the word. Lori, checking in to see if you have any final comments or things that you'd like to add.
Not necessarily anything different. I will just, I guess, triple the vote for collaboration. We've never applied really for a grant on behalf of one organization. Everything has always been a group of people. So I completely agree with Colleen. And it's, if you're a school district, find your cohorts in other school districts, and then, as a group, go and approach somebody together, or submit the application to EPA together, or something like that. So completely true.
Great. Let's see.
And Ken, I would also advocate to always.
Go ahead.
I would also advocate that if you do collaborate with others, make sure that you have a letter of agreement, a partnership agreement, or a way that if that contact that you have at that different school district or that different fleet leaves for any reason, the management understands what their responsibility will be. So I think it's important to just have it doesn't have to be anything formal, just a brief partnership agreement stating, you will provide this information because we are a project partner. So.
Yeah, that's good advice. Colleen, somebody is asking for your contact information.
I can be reached at Tucson Clean Cities at C Crowninshield at pagregion.com, or at 520-792-1093, extension 4426.
One more time.
520-792-1093, extension 4426.
Great. And then in the final slides, we will add a page with our contact information. So when we circulate the slides, you will have that in writing. Somebody just asked if we mentioned anything about the new DOE grant opportunity, which we did. We talked about that a little bit in the slides and the area of interest and the fact that for the DOE Clean Cities grant opportunity, the concept
They are not, if you are not already registered through grants.gov, you need to do so. That's going to be, first and foremost, extremely important. Register your company, your fleet through grants.gov so that you will get notification when these grants are coming out.
All right. With that, I'd like to give a special thanks to both Colleen and Lori for sharing their experiences and expertise, and thank everybody for participating, and remind everybody that you should come to Dallas for our workshop to EarthX on Friday morning, April 26th. There'll be tons of great information, a lot more details than we were able to provide today, and you'll hear from companies and organizations and funders about how best to put your projects together and get them funded and put them into action. So with that, thanks to everybody. Have a great day, and we will talk to you next time.